Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today, I would like to talk to you about accusations. Should we justify ourselves when we are accused? In order to understand accusations, we need to recall the structure of our personality. I have spoken about this before, but let me remind you. We have certain emotions, our impulses, and when a child becomes socialized, they develop external control. Let my right hand symbolize our desires and emotions, and my left hand will symbolize the control that restrains all of this. And this control is formed in childhood thoughtlessly simply because it is considered right and necessary, because it profoundly helps us to survive and effectively meet the significant expectations set by the caring and supportive adults around us. This essential control mechanism is very much like an experienced animal trainer. It is fundamentally simple and distinctly polar in its nature. Right versus wrong, bad versus good. And this pervasive control inherently creates certain fundamental rules of the game for each individual person. That is, a person limits themselves, not allowing themselves to do this or that. And when someone starts telling another person precisely how to do things in what they consider to be the absolutely right way, they are essentially wishing for that other person to be placed under the very same stringent restrictions and limitations. In other words, my rules of the game are like this and yours should be the same. For example, when someone says, you speak too slowly, or you speak too quickly, or when they say, you need to change your hairstyle or your clothes, and constantly give advice. So we are talking about direct instruction, about directly telling someone how they should behave properly. When we encounter such lecturing, it is important to understand who we are dealing with, what kind of person allows themselves to violate other people's boundaries. In other words, this is a person without boundaries, someone who does not understand where they end and another person begins. There are people, personalities, who are boundless in relation to everyone. This is especially characteristic of the post-Soviet space, because both the economy and culture there were controlled by the state. The state dictated what needed to be done. In other words, the more authoritarian the society a person lives in, the more problems that person will have with boundaries, both their own and those of others. Because they were told what to do, and if I diligently follow precisely what I am told to do, then it truly feels as though I gain the undeniable moral right to point this out to others. Well, these are the rules of the game for me, and they are the same for you. Each of us intuitively wants others to play by our rules, because this world is familiar to us. We already know how to survive in it. And if something is forbidden to me, then something should be forbidden to you as well, just as it is to me. Because if you are allowed to do it, it seems as though you have privileges, the ability to be freer than I am, to allow yourself more. That is precisely why individuals who are truly limited, who do not genuinely understand what it truly means to be a free or creative individual, will often attempt to impose their own restrictive rules. When this kind of accusation arises, that you are doing something wrong, for example, I occasionally receive comments about how Anna Ivanovna and I address each other by our full names and patronymics. People don't like this because, in their view, contact should be very close and informal. That is, when people have respect for each other, they set boundaries by addressing one another with their full names and patronymics. For them, this is wrong. They believe you should address each other informally and immediately establish a close connection. And even when someone writes, "Why do you do it this way?" there is already a hidden desire to impose their own rules. Such intrusions into personal boundaries often come from those closest to us. So when someone else tells us what is right, there is an inner urge to say, "That's none of your business." But undoubtedly such a response will lead to conflict, and it truly comes across as rude. That is why, first and foremost, when someone tells us how things should be done, it is important to look within ourselves and understand what is happening in our inner world. This is especially difficult when we are around loved ones who do not recognize boundaries. If it is a relative, an acquaintance, a child, or conversely children telling their parents how they should live, then there is no sense that this person is separate, that they are somewhat different, that they are their own person. And when another person intrudes with accusations or lectures, our internal alarm will automatically go off. In other words, we will feel this intrusion into our personal boundaries. And the whole point is whether we allow this to pass through our personal boundaries or not. First and foremost, we need to maintain these boundaries and not let them open up. It's as if a ball is flying toward you, but you don't catch it. In other words, if we catch this accusation, certain processes are triggered inside us. We realize that this person is dissatisfied with us, that they are telling us about something they consider bad about us. And then our own internal control mechanism kicks in, telling us, look, someone is unhappy with you. Look, they're saying you're not right. You need to live the right way. If a person hasn't developed their thinking, meaning they're not used to analyzing facts, and instead have a rigid internal control that dictates right and wrong, good and bad, should and shouldn't, then it's much harder for them to withstand such a blow. Because this accusation starts to echo something inside them. It's as if through this dynamic, the voice grows louder. In other words, it's not a quiet voice, but a loud one that fills the entire space you live in. For example, if you're forbidden to waste money, and most often our prohibitions are connected to the fact that we can't stop ourselves, which is why strict control keeps it in check. So when another person tells us that we spend too much money, it can synchronize with our own internal prohibition, and at that moment we start justifying ourselves to others. That is, in this process, it's important to understand that if there is no synchronization with your internal prohibitions, if your personal boundaries are clearly defined and you rely not on control, but on conscious thinking, meaning you are aware of what is happening in the moment, then other people's lectures won't even bother you. When we get angry at someone else's lecturing, it means that we are trying to push it away with our anger. In other words, it actually feels like a threat to us. If I understand who I am and why I do what I do, then other people's lectures will simply make me smile. That is, you will understand that the other person is boundless. They intrude. They want to trim you like grass on a lawn to their own height. But if your thinking is not yet engaged, if there is this constricting control that dictates what is right and wrong, it constantly creates confusion about what is actually right. That's why people who are guided by control rather than by thinking love to ask, so what is the right way? What should I do? You see, this question, what should I do, is very dangerous. Because when you ask what should be done, it's as if you immediately hand over your power or the keys to your own house to someone else. When you feel the urge to justify yourself in response to an accusation, it's important in that moment to stop yourself. Because if we start justifying ourselves to another person, in that moment, they feel their own power. They sense that they've hit a sore spot, and for such a person, their inner beast begins to rejoice inside. In other words, yes, I've broken through the armor, I've crossed personal boundaries, I've struck a weak spot, and each of us has a beast within. But those people who live, who are fueled by their inner beast, at that moment, they feel triumphant. And in an animalistic way, they sense where your weak spots are and start striking right there. That is, they look for some flaw that they can target. It could be your weight, height, age, wrinkles, or something else like that. And they start striking right there. At that moment, for example, if someone says something to me about my age, my wrinkles, my weight, and so on, clothing, well, anything related to appearance is always a sensitive topic, especially for women. And if, for example, I don't accept my age or the fact that I'm getting older, then I will react painfully to that. In fact, another person can't really hurt me unless I start hurting myself in response to their accusations. So, if I myself consider it a flaw, remember that voice starts to sound like a loudspeaker. In other words, no matter what someone else says, They can't actually do anything to us. We are the only ones who can do something to ourselves. And at that moment, an attack on oneself occurs. And in order to stop attacking myself, I start to justify myself. It may seem like I'm justifying myself to someone else, but in reality, it's to myself. Don't hurt me, I'm good. Don't hurt me. What can I do? I'm getting older. Don't hurt me. What can I do? I wanted to buy these expensive apples. Don't hurt me, I promise I'll lose weight. It's just that I accidentally gained weight right now. So our justification, which seems to be for someone else, is actually justification before ourselves, in order to stop this inner attack on our perceived flaws from our ideal self. This control of ours is directly connected to the ideal self, because if I become perfect, I will survive. And that's why the desire to justify oneself is always a desire to justify oneself before something inside, not before someone else. These boundaryless people, the ones who cross into others' boundaries, they give advice. Excuse me, you didn't ask me, but I'll write to you anyway. In other words, at that moment, when a person gives advice, they are asserting themselves. At that moment, they definitely believe they are better, that their life has been successful, fulfilled. And now they are going to teach someone who is worse off, someone weaker, or give direct instructions on how one should behave. First of all, it's important to understand that such people are dangerous. That is, if these are relatives and you have close ties, that's a somewhat different scenario. But if you encounter someone on social media who intrudes and tells you what to do, the first thing you need to understand is that this person is dangerous. They have no respect for their own boundaries and no respect for yours. You shouldn't take them seriously or do anything about their accusations. First and foremost, you need to allow your instinct for self-preservation to recognize that this person is dangerous. They are dangerous, and engaging in any kind of conversation with them will be perceived by them as an attack on their rules of the game. In other words, as soon as you start standing up for yourself, they will definitely see it as an attack on their sense of being right. It's as if you are suggesting to them, suggesting that they abandon their own rules by which they've lived, to give up their beliefs and adopt yours. And this, in fact, is not a discussion. If a person starts off with an accusation, there will be no discussion. This habit of justifying oneself is actually connected to something good. Some people start making excuses. They just walk into a place and already begin to justify themselves. For example, someone comes to a group and says, I didn't get enough sleep, I'm tired, I have a lot of work, so today I might be a bit slow, I might not be very sharp, I might be distracted, and so on and so forth. The person is laying down a safety net for their own self-criticism. It's as if they're telling themselves, don't hurt me, I'm a good person. And when a person is immature, everything is tied to this idea of being good. This constant need to prove that you are good, to prove that you are the best, that you are right, and that someone else is somehow wrong or not good enough. Everything revolves around this sense of being good. In other words, the person's main survival strategy remains immature. If I am good, then I will get what I want. And this desire to be good for everyone, to please everyone, is a road to nowhere. Because then a person is not free. They cannot choose for themselves where to go. And it is difficult for such people to realize themselves, because they are like a weather vane blown in every direction by others. If there is no critical thinking, I repeat, if you do not understand what is logical, what is true, what is actually happening, then you experience constant indecision and doubt, both internally and as an excessive dependence on others' opinions. Therefore, if you are being accused, the first thing you need to learn is not to start justifying yourself, because when you justify yourself, you are doing so before your ideal self. Secondly, understand the concept of separation. This is a summary of everything I have said. Understand that only you can attack yourself. If you do not attack yourself, then whatever someone else says will not affect you. Create that separation. Leave the person with their accusations and lectures in their own subjective world. Understand that this is their world and this is your world. And this desire to justify yourself, even to yourself, also needs to be noticed. Because if you are constantly justifying yourself to others and to yourself, instead of trying to understand what is really happening, but rather trying to prove your own goodness, then you will automatically respond to violations of your boundaries with others by justifying yourself. I wish you to become freer and realize your personal potential. Just a reminder that you can order my first book in English. It's called False Self, Real Self. The link is in the video description. Welcome to join us. On this channel, you'll find many different videos, each touching on topics that can inspire reflection and personal growth. Your support helps us grow stronger, move forward with purpose, and keep building this community. So make sure to subscribe. And to my regular subscribers, I would like to ask you to write which specific accusation feels like a weakness for you. In other words, try to do this. Make it legitimate in the comments and identify what you would definitely react to. By writing about it either in the comments or in the journals you keep, you allow yourself to delve into these weak spots and make them legitimate. This way, you will no longer be vulnerable to such attacks from yourself regarding them. I will say goodbye now. See you next time.